to the latest episode of The Claw's Corner. My guest today is professional musician, songwriter, lyricist, music producer, author, and podcaster. He is the founder, bassist, and vocalist of the well-known band Low 12. He has written hundreds of short stories, where many can be read in his books Creation of Chaos Volumes 1 and 2. Creation of Chaos Volume 3 will be released sometime in 2021, with stories such as 666 Express, Come to Jesus, and a modern version of a Poe classic entitled The Eyes Have It. In 2018, he released his debut novel, The Dreadful Lives of Enoch Strange. You can also hear him as a co-host on the podcast Murder, Metal, Mayhem, and the upcoming Voice of Dread podcast. Please give a big horns high to the busiest and most talented person I know, Pete Altieri.
Hey, what's up, Rich? Good to see you and all your viewers out there.
Yeah, great having you on the
out
show.
In Horns High Studio, got the flames behind me.
Yes, I see that.
I'm ready. I'm ready for you. I know you said you got a whole bunch of questions, and I know how prepared you are. I love those clips you sent me of the other guests saying, man, this is like the best interview I've ever done. So having done a ton of these, it is always nice when somebody's prepared and actually puts the work in. So that's awesome. I'm looking forward to this.
We'll say right off the bat, you're very welcome. And it was so much fun doing research on you because you have done so much. So we might as well get right into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start back in 1998. You founded the band Low 12, and you were the founder, singer, and bassist. Where did you come up with the name?
Well, it was funny. At the time, I had been playing music, and I took quite a long break, 10 years from my first band. And so living here in Illinois, and, you know, I thought about maybe starting up something, but really didn't have, you know, much desire to do it. But then all of a sudden, you know, got the inkling to start looking for other musicians. And anyway, I was going through becoming a Freemason because I was just interested in what that was all about. And from back in doing the shows at the Masonic Lodge in Bethel, Connecticut is what gave me that idea. But anyway, I became a Freemason, and in the third degree of Freemasonry, they kind of go through, I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but it's like kind of like a play, and you participate in it, and you're like a character. Of course, at first you don't know what's going on, but then after you do it, then you are part of the degree for other people that go through it. Anyway, long story short, in the third degree, there's a death that happens, and they bury the body at Low 12. And it just sounded really cool to me. I'm like, what does that mean? You know, so I asked the older guys, and they said, oh, it means midnight, you know, and I'm like, that's kind of cool. And then I got home. This is like in the infancy of the internet, and looked it up online just to see if I can learn more about it. Just something about the name, it sounded interesting to me. So I Googled it, or whatever it was back in the 98, if Google was a thing, I don't remember. Anyway,
yeah.
I Googled it, and it came up with all this really interesting stuff about it being like, it does mean midnight, but it also means like the final moments of the day or of your life. So your personal Low 12 would be those moments before your death. And so I thought that was definitely made me think, yeah, there's the band name right there. So that was it. And I just thought it sounded cool. There's no real major significance. Definitely not a band about Freemasonry. I actually got out of it about a year later, but I just liked the name. It just sounded good.
Well, with a name like that, I'm guessing you weren't doing ABBA covers.
No ABBA covers. No, all heavy stuff. You know, I would liken it to Slayer meets Exodus meets maybe Carcass and some of the Morbid Angel, some of the old school death metal. A little bit of all of that stuff rolled into one. I don't really sing death metal vocals. I'm not a, you know, like growler, like deep growling, but definitely raspy, and somewhere in between the thrash metal vocal and death, somewhere in between there is kind of where I think I'm at. But, you know, we stopped in 2016, so I haven't been with Low 12 now for 4 years. And I'm not playing currently. I've got other stuff I'm doing. So I think my playing days are done, but I do on Murder Metal Mayhem, I do a funny, I mock karaoke at the end of each episode, and I call it my killer karaoke, or I kill karaoke. And so I do like really lame ballads and the lamest songs I can come up with, pop songs, and just destroy them with vocals like I do. So just like to have fun with it.
Yeah,
So
well,
I at least get to sing every week, but it's goofy stuff. But I have done a couple of guest vocal spots with other bands, so I could do it. And that's one of the reasons I like to do the karaoke, is at least keep my voice to where I could, if somebody wanted me to come in and do some vocals in a studio or something, be totally down with that.
I have to say, I did listen to some of your karaoke, and you do a mean Neil Diamond. Sweet Caroline is the one I heard.
Oh, Sweet Caroline. Yeah, I mean, I've done My Heart Will Go On. I mean, the more ridiculous they are, the funnier they are, especially with the big backing vocals. That's what makes it funny.
What's it say? With your singing, Caroline never had a chance.
No, she did not. No, she did not.
Well, we're gonna get into all of it.
I did Sweet Home Chicago this week for our episode on the Chicago Ripper Crew. So I usually try to tie them in with something about the show for that episode. So
we're going to get into all of that, because there is so much that you've done, like I mentioned, and we're still in 1998. So I want to stick with Low 12 for just a little while, because I did love that band. I'm a huge fan of that band.
Thank you.
And you released your demo, Blunt Force Trauma, which was an instant success. So right off the bat, you guys were really popular. It wasn't the 10-year overnight success. You made that demo, and bam.
Yeah, we were playing out a lot back in the early days. Blunt Force Trauma was a good one. It gave us something to market ourselves with. A new band, it's hard to break ground. And I was living here in Illinois, and so nobody knew me out here from my previous work. So I was starting from scratch, which in a way was kind of good. I had no past. I just showed up, and we exploded out here, playing a lot of clubs, and a lot of the bands that were, kind of in every local scene's got that hierarchy of bands that have been around. And we pissed off a lot of people. I mean, I was good at that. People that thought, we were supposed to be, at this level, and we were playing up here, and they just didn't like the competition. So we made some enemies, but we also made a lot of really good friends, and that's when it got me going into heavycore and a lot of that kind of stuff that I did to kind of unite and help bands, have bands helping each other out. So
we're going to talk about, but before we do that, I want to talk about your EP Kill Floor, because what impressed me the most is you're really a DIY guy, do it yourself. And with that EP, you sold 1,000 copies by hand copying and assembling each one. That is really impressive.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, we just, we had no money. So, I mean, we had to do everything, like you said, DIY. And back, when I started playing in the 80s, with cassettes, that's what we did. We burned them ourselves and made the little, paper, glued it onto the cassette, Yep. CDs, at least you got the labels and you could stick them on. It's a little more high tech. Now everything's digital. It's so easy now that a lot of the young guys probably have no idea about any of that stuff. But I came from the old school, so flyering, going to shows, passing them out outside the show or in the show, throwing them out in the crowd, doing whatever we could to get the name out there.
Now, were any of your songs ever featured in a movie?
Yeah, we had a few songs. The most notable was the film Jigsaw, not related to Saw. This would have been in the 90s at some point, but it was a straight to DVD release, but it was actually very well done, very professional. And they used the song on that. And then we were also on, the guy that did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre did a film called Butcher Boys. It was I think it did a little mini run in the theaters, but it was mostly went straight to, I think it was Showtime, and it came to Netflix. And that was actually the first time I'd ever used Netflix before my daughter was, watching Netflix on her laptop. And I was like, hey, we're in this movie that's supposed to be on there. I didn't know anything about it. It was my introduction to the streaming age, but we had 2 songs in that, in a car chase scene. There was like a car full of metalheads being chased by like these drug dealers or something. And every time they went to the metalhead car, they were headbanging, and Low 12 was on the stereo. It was really cool. Like the movie opened with that. So
Wow.
I was like, holy crap, you know, they used 3 songs. They used 3 songs in that one. So it was really cool. We did a couple of major low budget stuff, but those were the 2 notable ones.
Well, did you approach the studio yourself, or did they find you?
For the Butcher Boys one, actually our drummer at the time, Wes Pollock, he grew up with a guy that was doing the sound for the film. And he was in touch with him, and he was like, hey, you know, can you, you know, hook us up? And he was actually all game because they were looking for bands, you know, and of course bands they weren't going to have to pay a bunch of money to use their music. I think we got like 2 copies of the DVD when it came out. That was our payment. So yeah, I've not seen a dime, but the exposure was great. It was really cool just to say you were part of something like that.
I was going to say, especially when you're first beginning, getting the exposure is more important, because the money will come hopefully eventually if you continue long enough, or if you get that lucky break. But to me, the exposure is more important in the very beginning. So I love your attitude. Now, did the band ever release a DVD?
Yeah, we did. When we released the Skin in the Game album, I can't remember when that came out, like the years all blur. 2014, 2015-ish, we came out with an album called Skin in the Game, and in there was a DVD called 13 Brutal Years. So it was 13 years in. So that would have been, you know, maybe 2011. So anyway, we released it. I put it together myself. I used like a lot of old VHS footage of us at some early shows, and just different things I put together, and it was 66 minutes and 6 seconds long, which was really cool. Of course.
I'd be disappointed if it wasn't that.
No, and when we get to 666 Express, I've got a similar thing with that. But anyway, yeah, that was 13 Brutal Years, and then we came out with like an unofficial live bootleg called Live at East Side. We recorded a show at the East Side Tavern in Columbia, Missouri, which was a favorite spot of ours. About a 5-hour trip for us, but it was just a good town. University of Missouri, they had a radio station that did metal, and they were all about Low 12. They played our songs all the time. So we had a really good following down there. So that was a cool show, and we released that. Just, again, all of this is DIY. I mean, none of this stuff is like major label. This is shoestring budgets, you know, camcorder, you know, very low budget, but you know, the creativity and some of the stuff that goes into it, a band can really go a long way with very little if they just think, you know, and think of people they know that might know somebody, or, you know, guy owns a building that's getting demolished. We did that with a music video for Brutal World. I had a buddy that was a demolition contractor, and he was tearing a building down, and this building was like this big commercial building that was half torn down. I'm like, that'd be so cool for the Brutal World video. And the guy's like, yeah, you could do it, you know. So I had him sign something, so in case the cops showed up, we wouldn't get arrested. And we did a day shoot and a night shoot in this building, and it's badass. I mean, you can check it out on YouTube. It's called Brutal World. But we shot that at a demolition site, and people have watched that and then, man, where did you find that location? How much did that cost? And I'm like, nothing. I mean, we had 3, you know, mini DVs on tripods and did it all ourselves. I mean, it's amazing what you could do if you just think, use some creativity.
You know what? I like that, because a lot of my favorite bands I like in the very beginning when they were still hungry and they were trying to make it. Sometimes when they become famous and the money coming in, you could tell they're just phoning it in. So a lot of the bands I do like are what you're doing. I love the when they're hungry, they're doing anything they can. Yeah, so
it's hard to be angry. It's hard to be angry when you got millions of dollars in the bank. You know what I mean? When you're starving to death and you're eating ramen noodles every night, you're pissed. And you get the power bills get ready to be shut off, you know, and you're mad. So you're writing metal, and punk or hardcore, any of that kind of stuff. I mean, how in the world do you do that legit with millions of dollars? I mean, you would totally, and you guys, you get older, you chill a little bit. So between the chilling and the money, I mean, yeah, I could see bands like Metallica. I mean, I can't even deal with them anymore. I loved them back in the day, but now it's just garbage, you know.
I was with you back in the Kill 'Em All days and Ride the Lightning.
Oh, hell
Now
yeah, dude.
I don't
I
even
was
really know
at,
what.
I saw them on Ride the Lightning with Cliff.
Yes,
My hands were up on the stage at the Agora Ballroom in
I love that
Hartford,
place.
Connecticut. And I was there. Wasp, Armored Saint, Metallica was a blizzard. And I was there, and I literally was an arm's length from Cliff doing Anesthesia. I mean, it was so wicked. And, you know, tell people those stories now, and they're just like, man, that's crazy. You know, it just, I'm glad we both grew up at a time when we did, because we got to experience a lot of stuff that anybody be after that just doesn't get it, you know.
No, I say the same thing. I love the age I am. For me,
Yeah,
Metallica, the first time I saw them was with Cliff Burton when they opened up for Ozzy at the New Haven Coliseum or the Hartford Civic Center. I never
yeah,
saw them at the Agora. I had tickets getting ready to see them at the Agora, and that's unfortunately when Cliff died. It was on the Master of Puppets tour. So
yes.
I saw him once at the Civic Center or the Coliseum, but I never had a chance to see him at the Agora. I was this close though.
Oh man,
Yeah. And then
still awesome though.
oh yeah, definitely. So we're still talking about Low 12.
Sure.
Did you ever open up for any major bands? Speaking of major bands like Metallica, I know bands like Cannibal Corpse, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we opened for Cannibal Corpse. We opened for Propane. We opened for El Nino. We actually did a show with Mastodon before they became big. We did a show with Chimera. We did a bunch of them. I mean, but probably Cannibal Corpse, Guar.
Yes.
Guar was probably the most people we ever played in front of. It was packed. We played first and we just tore it up. The management actually picked us to open. That was the best time, the best way I'd ever seen that done, because normally it's somebody's buddy or some band buys tickets and then, you know, pays to play basically.
Yeah.
But this one, the management wanted the venue to give them 3 bands that they liked from local, and then they listened to all of them and they picked us. So that was really cool. So that was rewarding because we actually earned the right to open versus just, you know, right place, right time. Cannibal Corpse was right place, right time, but that was wicked because it was Cannibal Corpse and Misery Index, both, you know, just killers. So that was a good one.
My question is Guar. I love them. I think they're hilarious. What were they like off stage?
They were really cool, but you know, I didn't know a lot about Guar, so I had no idea who they were, like especially without the stuff on, you know what I mean? The costumes. So they were really nice. The ones that we talked to, I think the drummer and a couple of the roadies were the ones came over to our merch table. And then after that, few years after that, we did the Indianapolis Metal Fest and played with Mobile Death Camp, which is fronted by one of the former Guar guys that played Beefcake, Todd. He's a good dude. And in Mobile Death Camp, they don't wear costumes and stuff. And he's super nice, super good dude. So yeah, the ones that I met were straight up really good guys.
You can tell from their stage show they have a great sense of humor.
Oh my God. I
Yeah.
was blown away that they could play like that with all that crap on. I mean, that was nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, they could legit play. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Well, you mentioned it earlier. I want to talk about it now. Heavycore. What is that?
It was an organization I started because, like I said, we were running into all sorts of crap here in our local scene. And I thought, you know, there's got to be bands in other local scenes in the same boat. So I thought, why don't I go? And that was back when mp3.com was a thing. And I was going on there and I was finding bands in other towns, like in New Jersey and Arkansas, wherever, and listening to them and going, you know, these guys are cool. And I thought, you know, why don't I get all these bands together and like we could gig exchange with each other? So that's when I started Heavycore back in, I think it was 99 when I started it. And it was just an organization to help bands. In the early days, it was just free to join, but it got out of control. I couldn't keep up with all the bands. It was like 15, 20 bands a day were signing up. I couldn't keep up with it.
Wow.
And it was free. So, I mean, it's not like I could quit my job and do that. So then we started charging like $10 a year. I figured that would at least weed out the one-man band that like not really doing anything, or bands that were kind of getting ready to start but really hadn't. And it weeded out a lot of that. We were still getting a lot of bands signing up, but the $10, we gave them membership cards, and it was cool. And it was a good way to weed it out. It was just gotten too big. And then I did a radio show, an internet radio show before they were called podcasts, called the Chopping Block. And I played, heavycore bands. We would do shows with only heavycore. It was like a union. So the thing was, I turned the tables on the local scene as we started to get bigger, and the clubs wanted us to play with these bands that we didn't like. I said, no, we're not going to play unless you let us play with heavycore bands. So then I would bring the bands in, and we were packing the places up, so they didn't argue with us. But then the bands that were bitching and whining about us, doing what we were doing, were now out. They weren't able to play these bigger shows we were doing. And then I started doing a thing called a poser roast, which was at least six or more heavycore bands doing a show, and we numbered them. So when a heavycore band wanted to host a poser roast, they would get a hold of me and I'd sign them a number. And so we had poser roast 10, 11, 12. I mean, they were all over the country doing these poser roasts, and it was awesome. And it was a great way to promote it. And I did comp CDs. The bands got on these comp CDs I put out. We did a DVD called Roasting Posers with videos. And it was great, but it kind of ran its course. I got a little disheartened with it. As Facebook and, especially MySpace, these places were available. Bands were networking on their own. They didn't really need somebody to do it for them. And there were still bands that wanted to stay on just because it was such a cool thing. But it became less of a thing as bands were able to market themselves easier with social media as it became a thing. So I stopped it. It was probably, it was before Low 12 was done. So I did it for probably 10, 11 years, maybe 12 years. It was great, but just an organization to help bands. That's all. Metal bands, though. No poser bands. We had certain categories for bands, thrash, death, hardcore, crossover bands that were metal enough that we'd let them in. And not every band got in. I mean, there were plenty I said no thanks, and so it was the bands felt like they were part of a group. It was just a cool thing.
I'm guessing Poison and Bon Jovi never had a chance.
No. I mean, there were some more old, like straight metal bands that were fine. It wasn't like all we wanted was death metal bands, but the bands were typically heavier. But we had some little more, not really rock, but they were definitely metal, but more, like it straight and narrow 80s style, just power metal was cool. We had a wide variety. We really did. The comps showed that. I mean, there were bands from all walks of life, all over the world. We were, all over continents. I mean, it was crazy, some of the bands that were signing up to it. So it was a great thing.
What impresses me the most is you're talented in so many things: writing, podcasting, bands. But even more important than that is you are the marketing maestro. You are a promoting master. You know exactly how to get your name out there. And that, I think, is just as important as being talented.
Thanks, man. Well, I mean, I try. I mean, I wish I could find a way to monetize all this.
Yes.
That's the key. That's the thing I've been missing. Now, not to say I haven't enjoyed all these different things that I've done. I certainly have. And that's what, makes me want to get up in the morning, is the creative things that I do. But it would be nice, of course, to make a living doing this, but then it might lose its luster when it's a paycheck. So maybe I shouldn't complain. I'm certainly, enjoying it. I got the flame wall behind me and
Love it.
in Horns High Studios, and I'm talking to you, and got a wonderful wife. As a matter of fact, I noticed her name is on the
Yeah.
screen there. So, because she uses this Zoom for work, I didn't even think of that. But anyway, so I can't complain. I got two great kids. I got two great grandkids. And if I would have been, a road musician that quote unquote made it, I probably wouldn't have all those things. So I'm not complaining at all.
No, it goes back to being hungry. And I love what you're doing. Keep up the great work. Now, we all know the terrible tragedy that happened on September 11, 2001. I want
Yeah.
you to tell me why that day was so special for you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was a crazy one. I was on my way to work. I was working out of town that day, and, like most people heard it on the news, and I had been going through chemotherapy for testicular cancer. And I started chemo the June of '01. And so by September, I had finished my treatments, and I did a CAT scan to see if the, cancer was gone. And I pulled into the place where I was going as the first plane hit the towers. And I was like, what the heck, So I went in, it was a school, so I didn't know what, they were going to dismiss or what was going on. And I went into the office in the school, and my phone rang, and it was my oncologist, my nurse that I dealt with. And she said, hey, I got great news. Your cancer's gone. And then right after that was when the second plane hit. So I got this great news between the planes hitting the towers. It was a very weird day because I was very happy and excited that my cancer was gone. But I was also, really freaking out about the tragedy of September 11th. And, my family is from the East Coast. As you know, that's where you and I know each other. And did have some people through family that worked there, but nobody that I'm aware of that anybody that I knew had passed. But of course, the people that are from there had, probably just about everybody would know somebody that died in that terrible event. So yeah, that was the day my cancer was in remission. So every year on September 11th is definitely a weird day. It's very mixed emotions.
Very happy that the cancer is gone. I'm very happy that you're healthy
Thanks.
and still
Me
kicking
too.
ass, Horns High.
Oh yeah.
Now, onto your writing.
Okay.
When did your love of writing begin?
I was in fourth grade. I was sitting there in class on a Friday. I remember this very clearly. It was amazing because I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I can remember this. But anyway, I was sitting there in class. It was like toward the end of the day, and I remember the teacher giving us an assignment for the weekend. So, everybody's groaning and moaning. And I thought, well, I don't want to do this assignment. She said it was a writing assignment. I'd never written anything before, and she said, I want you to write a 300-word short story that starts with, it was a dark and stormy night, the classic. And I was just like, oh, like everybody else, and I remember sitting there at my kitchen table because my parents always made me do my homework on the kitchen table right after dinner. So there was no ifs, ands, or buts, you're getting it done. And so I sat there and this blank sheet of paper in front of me that we all had to write down in the class. It was a dark and stormy night, ... And I put the pencil to the paper, and it was literally like it wrote itself. I had this story just gushing out of me, and the words just flowed really fast. And I realized, even at that age, I'm like, this is what I was supposed to do. I mean, this comes too easy to me. And I think I wrote like 1,000-word story about some haunted house, some crazy haunted house type story. And I think I made like a cover for it. I'm a terrible artist. Like, that's one thing I can't do. And so it was really crappy, but it was really excited, because I had written this story that I thought was pretty cool. And the teacher was blown away on Monday when she got it. Of course, made me get up and read it in front of the class. And I was petrified. I was kind of shy back then and petrified to do it. But for some reason, when I got up there in front of the class and was telling them the story, and I could tell that they liked it, it was very empowering. And so that was the beginning of it, was that assignment in 4th grade.
It's so odd. I have a very similar story to myself, because growing up, for some reason, I was severely shy until about 11th or 12th grade. And the only thing I loved doing was I loved writing stories. And my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Karnowski, thank you very much. She used to have me get up in front of the class and read the stories. And that was really the only time I felt comfortable talking at that time. And she tried to enroll me into a writing class. And that was the same thing as you. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want that. She was trying to get me more comfortable to get it, so I can get out of my shell and become more comfortable talking to people. And
Right.
I just loved writing stories. Unfortunately, back when I was in 4th grade, I didn't know of a little word called plagiarisms. When Close Encounters came out, I wrote the book UFO. And when Jaws came out, I wrote a great book. It was a blockbuster called Shark. But that's where I got my feet wet writing. And I want to thank you, because I did come out with a book, and you were a big help in that. Just several years ago, you helped me with the covers, and it was it's self-published, but it's with a friend of mine who's starting his own company called Ray R Publishing. And I want to thank you, because it was actually, I did a book signing. I'm going to talk to you about your book signings. I did one at Barnes & Noble in West Hartford.
Awesome,
and
man.
They said
That's
it was
great.
they said it was the biggest local author book signing they have ever had. I sold 20 books. I ran out, and people still wanted to buy more. And
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I do want to thank you for that. But I thought it was funny, because it was exactly the same thing for me. 4th grade, funny. I loved writing. That's when I had my love of writing. I was severely shy, and the teacher was trying to get me out of my shell by having me in front of the class. And for some reason, that was the only thing that I felt comfortable doing, was reading in front of the class, and then go back down and go, with my head down. I don't want to talk to anybody. But as soon as I had those words in my hand, I would come to life. But
that's awesome, man.
Now, for you, who are some of your favorite writers growing up, and who do you currently read?
Growing up, definitely Edgar Allan Poe, #1, always will be. My uncle used to make me these cassette tapes from these LPs of Vincent Price reading Edgar Allan Poe stories, and that just blew my mind. That's why I decided to do that story that you mentioned earlier, because that Telltale Heart was the first one. But yeah, Poe, really like Ray Bradbury. I read a lot of the classics in school. I loved Orwell. I read Animal Farm in 1984 as I got older. So kind of a variety, but all in that same horror suspense type genre. Currently, I wish I had more time to read, but most of my reading now is research for Murder, Mental Mayhem, or researching stuff for my writing projects if I need to do some of that. So most of it's true crime. I like a lot of that stuff because of the podcast I do, but yeah, not as much now. I mean, I if I do get a chance, I still like Stephen King. I love Joe Hill. I know we both like him. I still love Poe, Lovecraft, Ray Bradbury. Still read that stuff, but not as much now that I'm busy with the Murder, Mental Mayhem. Being a weekly podcast is relentless. And, our shows are like 2.5 hours long. So there's quite a bit of work that goes into writing that script every week. So it's just enough to keep up with that.
I can imagine. For me, Jonathan Mayberry, which I know I've introduced you to some of his novels.
Yeah.
He's a great
yeah,
author.
Very good. He's really good.
Yeah.
I like Nelson DeMille. I like Greg Iles is really good.
Yes,
I
he
think
is
we
great.
both talked about that before. Yeah. There's a ton of them out there. Like I said, I wish I had more time, to read just leisurely, because most of it's for research now, at least.
Well, I discovered your stories on Wattpad.
Yeah.
And when I was reading those stories back then, it said you were a top 35 finalist in the TNT Horror Story Contest. Which story was that?
Man with Spots.
Oh, that was a great story. Yeah.
Thank you. That was the first Low 12 song we ever wrote. So I wrote a song about it, then later wrote a story about it, because it actually happened to me when I was little. That was like a childhood fear. I had these nightmares. My mom was like, what are you freaking out about? I was like 5. And I said, the man with spots. She's like, who's that? I'm like, I don't know, you know. And to this day, I've tried to find any sort of cartoon character that might fit the thing in my mind of what he looks like. Because I used to love to watch Spider-Man, the cartoon, when I was that age. And I've looked at every villain I could find, and none of them. So I think it's just a figment of my imagination, a very vivid imagination. But yeah, that was the story. I submitted like 6 stories because it was free to submit. I found out about it like 2 days before the deadline, so I got lucky. I saw it, and I submitted the stories I thought fit, but they didn't tell us what the contest was for. It was just horror. That was it. So I submitted the ones I thought were the best ones that I had, you know, the Jesus Tree. There was a few of them I sent in. And the Man with Spots was one of them. And that was the one they picked. So they picked it out of the group, and it made it to the top. I think it was the top 300. Then it was 100, because there was like 11,000 entries. So I made it to the top. I think it was 300. Then it was 100. They kept whittling it down. I made it to the top 35, but I did make it into the top 10. The top 10 were supposed to be optioned for a redo. They were supposed to be doing TNT, Tales from the Crypt, was the plan. The top story would have got guaranteed to be on the show. The other 9 would have been maybe, but I think they gave you like $2,000 just for the option to use it. But I didn't make it to the top 10. I made it to the top 35, but I was the only one that I saw in the top 35 that wasn't a full-time author. Everybody I was competing with were authors. I was the only one of that group that I was aware of that was just doing it on the side, you know, for fun, basically. So that was kind of cool, very rewarding. At 11,000, made it to the top 35. But man, it would have been nice to hit the top 10, though.
No, it's still
maybe
very
next
impressive.
time.
You mentioned another one of my favorite stories, the Jesus Tree, which is based on a real tree in Bethel, Connecticut. I loved the ghost story aspect in your story, but
yeah, I don't do that very much. I don't do ghost stories typically, but yeah, the Jesus Tree in Danbury, it's right by the Danbury-Brewster, New York line.
Okay.
It doesn't exist anymore, but when I was in high school, kids used to go up there and drink. It's like a country road. And there was this giant tree. It was an oak tree, I believe. And if you got back far enough and you had enough beer or pot in you, you thought you saw Jesus on the cross. Oh, wow. And so it was just a cool hangout. Kids hung out at the Jesus Tree. And the rumor was if you did something to deface the tree, you had like horrible things would happen to you. And when I always thought it would have been a cool idea to write about, and I've been in bands and I thought about writing a song about it, just never really happened. And then when I started writing short stories again, I thought I'm going to do the Jesus Tree, but I didn't want to do the corny, you know, kids deface the tree and something happens to them. To me, everybody's going to do it that way. So I wanted to do it my own way. And I came up with I thought it would be interesting to come up with a backstory of why it was called the Jesus Tree. Nobody knew why. It was just a thing. But I made up a story of this guy that lived on this property, and you know, he had this affair, and he kills the girl because she's pregnant, and then she comes back to haunt him, and so he's afraid of her. So he has this special tree brought in from a monastery that's supposed to ward off the evil spirits, and there were 12 other trees next to it, like disciples, you know, the whole Jesus and the disciple thing. And that's how it all started. I just came up with this backstory of why the Jesus Tree was even there. And then this girl that comes back every year on the 4th of July, which is when he killed her, and comes back, you know, from the dead, and he's just haunted by it.
I love the story. So I'm guessing you answered my question. The Manfield family does not exist. The background.
No, well, they do, but they don't exist in that context.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It's just totally made up. All of that's completely made up.
Love it. Now I want to talk
Thanks.
about Blunt Force Press. What is that?
That's my own publishing company that I've been self-publishing my books through Amazon printing. So the physical books, like, my last one. And then, also I'm getting ready to start doing audio books now, which is one of the things I've been working on, is audio versions of some of my short stories, kind of get myself ready and work out the kinks so I can start doing my 3 books I have out now. I'd like to go back and do them all, and then the new stuff I'm working on. So eventually everything I do will be both audio and print, as well as ebook, all formats.
How can you get the audio?
Right now, the audio stuff I've done is I've done them as bonus episodes for Murder Metal Mayhem. So I did one around Thanksgiving called the Last Supper. It's about a dysfunctional family that everybody meets for Thanksgiving, and that's it, because they hate each other. Everybody at the table wants somebody at the table to die, and this is their last supper. And it's pretty wild, but last year I wrote a story around Christmas called The Wreath. That was a horror story, and I did an audio version of that for Christmas last year. And this year I did the Thanksgiving story, Last Supper. And then we just recently put together the 666 Express, which will be the story that we're releasing for Christmas Eve. But this one is quite a bit more over the top. The other ones are just straight up, me reading the story. But this is, involves all the personalities on Murder Metal Mayhem. There's 4 of us, are each characters in this crazy story about this train that says it can drive 666 miles an hour. And it'll go from Dallas to Denver, which is 666 miles, I checked, in 1 hour. So these 2 friends, which is me and CK, the other one of the other guys, we're coming out of this concert, and this guy's handing out flyers, and we take the flyer, and it says, hey, you can win a ride on the 666 Express. We're like, that just sounds crazy. And so I won't spoil the story, but we get on this train and we meet 2 other guys on the train that are the other 2 guys on Murder Metal Mayhem, Joey and Chris. And it's a lot of fun. It starts out really fun and kind of almost campy, but then once the door of the train closes, all bets are off, and it's absolute insanity. And I use on the audio, I have a narrator, Brad Tucker. He's fantastic. He does the audio. Each one of the 4 of us did all our own lines, our dialogue lines. And then we used, I made special effects, heartbeats, all sorts of noises, fire that you hear as the story is unfolding, and the tension builds. The noises are getting louder. And then we just recently interviewed an Australian band called In Malice's Wake that I love, and they do the music for it. So they've got a new album out, and so they were kind enough to let us use a few songs. And so we've got music, we've got sound effects, different voices. It's over the top. And guess what, Rich? What? It's 66 minutes and 6 seconds long. And that'll be out on Christmas Eve. But people could go to murdermetalmayhem.com and check out. I did Long Dark Hallway, which was a story in my first book, Creation of Chaos 1.
Love that story as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I did The Wreath, as I mentioned, and The Last Supper. Those are the 3 I've already done, and you can go on Murder Metal Mayhem and find those. But the new one, the 666 Express, comes out Christmas Eve.
Well, I have to tell you, for my research, you let me read The Eyes Have It and 666 Express, and both, I'm not going to give anything away, both stories I loved for completely different reasons. Awesome. I think what's great, what I like best about your writing is how descriptive you are. Sometimes there's not a lot of dialogue and you don't even really need it, but you're so descriptive. I feel like I'm on the train with you and Chris. I feel like the heat, when it's getting hotter and hotter, I'm getting warmer. Cool. I mean, the way you write, it's like watching a movie, and I love that about your writing. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I've had several people say that, and it's funny because it's not like I'm trying to do it. I guess that's just how I tell the story. I just see it in my mind and I'm watching it on a screen, so
Yeah.
I'm trying to explain it to you. So yeah, I appreciate that. That's very nice of you to say.
Other one, The Eyes Have It, which I said is it's sort of you're paying homage or paying homage to an Edgar Allan
Yeah.
Poe classic. And
Yes.
what I like best about this story is you have the option for the reader to pick one ending or an alternate ending.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm not going to give anything away. I personally like the first ending. That's all I'm going to say.
It's funny because the first ending was the alternate ending.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and my beta reader, Chris Kovacs,
Yeah.
and my wife both said the alternate ending is the better ending. And I'm like, you know what? It kind of is. So I switched them at the last minute and made the alternate ending the ending, and the Poe ending, I call it, the alternate ending. So yeah, the Telltale Heart is my favorite. I thought it would be cool to take the story but completely change it, and I mash it up with a real life conglomeration of serial killers. Charles Albright, the Texas eyeball killer, who we're actually doing in January on Murder Metal Mayhem. Gacy, Dahmer, Gein. I mean, this guy's got a whole slew of killers inside of him. With the villain of the stalking. In my story, it's an old woman, and of course, Poe's it's the old man. But in Poe's story, the evil eye is what drives him to do it. But with me, I changed it because Albright's thing was he was obsessed with women's eyes. And so I used that to change it up. And instead of being negative about her eyes, it's her eyes that he adores, why he's doing it.
Yeah.
So I change it up, but it still revolves around the eye thing. And then The Eyes Have It, I thought, Stephen King often comes up with funny, clever little names for his short stories.
Yes.
I hadn't done that really before. I usually kind of serious with it. And you know what? The Eyes Have It was kind of a cool name. So I thought, let's go with that. So I did.
Definitely, and it was a great version of Edgar Allan Poe. You're not copying him; you're paying homage to him, and it's a great story. And either way, I love both endings. I said my personal favorite is the first, but it's a great story. And
thanks. I did a Lovecraft story too.
Yeah,
The Thing on the Doorstep. But that one, instead of radically changing it, I kept it similar, but I did change a lot of stuff. But it's much more like the way his story is, except I tell it in a different order. I simplified it a little bit and modernized it. But it's another story I thought would be fun. I've never done anything like that before. I just thought, this is my third short story collection. Let's try some stuff out of the comfort zone. Let's try some things that I'd never done before. And I thought, you know what? I'd never heard of anybody doing that. Now, I'm not saying somebody hasn't, because I don't know if any idea you could really say is original anymore. Everybody's come up with something. But I had never heard of somebody taking a story and kind of changing it up or retelling it or something like that. And I thought I wanted to do both authors justice because they're both legends, of course. So I didn't want somebody to read it and go, you know what, why did you even bother? The story's already been told. I wanted to do it my own way, but respectful of the originator of the idea. So,
well, that's a great way to say it, because the movie Psycho, whoever it was, Gus Van Sant did the remake, frame by frame, it's exactly the same movie. Well, don't even make a movie. Just go watch the original.
It's already been done.
Yeah, exactly. So I love the way you modernize the classic.
That,
No.
Yeah, I don't make any. It doesn't make any sense to me to do it like that. So no. And The Thing on the Doorstep, I had a friend of mine, actually Sean from In Malice's Wake's a big Lovecraft fan, and I said, man, I want you to be critical. Read this thing and tell me, like, am I on, or is it a waste of my time? He's like, dude, this is amazing. I really liked it. So I'm really happy. And one of my co-hosts for Murder Metal Mayhem, Joey, he really loved it, and he had just reread the original and was like really digging the way I changed it up. So two of my friends, both who I respect, both thought it was worth doing. So I'm happy I did it.
You mentioned
They'll
the
both
band.
be in Creation of Chaos 3.
Well, I was going to talk about that because you have Creation of Chaos 1, Volume 1,
Right.
Creation of Chaos Volume 2. When
Right.
will Creation of Chaos Volume 3, which features 666 Express, the Eyes Have, and many other stories, when's that going to be released?
I'm hoping by the spring.
Okay.
We've got an appearance, hopefully, with everything going on with COVID. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
But in May, I've got an appearance with Murder Metal Mayhem at the Revenant Con in near Charleston, Illinois. I don't remember the date offhand, but anyway, I want to have them for that. So
Okay.
my hope is that it will be, sometime before May. I'm about 3/4 of the way done with it. I'm also going to take a story from Creation of Chaos 1 and Creation of Chaos 2, and I'm going to do a redo and do alternate endings for this 2 of those. So I'm going to take 2 of my own. I've already did that with in Creation of Chaos 1, the story Contraption number 12 has an alternate ending where you can choose, like Goosebump style, which way to go. I've already done that. But the fans really liked it, so I really wanted to do it again. I didn't do it in Creation of Chaos 2. I just couldn't figure out a good one to do it. I hate to just do it half-assed. But I do like the story I did called Carnival of Atonement. I'm going to do an alternate ending for that one. And then the other one, I think is the Jesus Tree. I think I'm going to do an alternate ending for that.
Can't wait to see the ending for that one. Actually, Carnival of Atonement, I love that story as well. I haven't read one bad story yet, so I'm very curious to see what the alternate endings are going to be. In Creation of Chaos Volume 2, you also have other writers featured in that book. Who are they, and how'd you meet them?
Yes. Angel Rosa was my roommate back when I lived in Danbury, Connecticut. Angel's a good friend. He's a filmmaker now and an author. And he's really good, and so he let me use one of his stories in there. And then a local author here in Normal, Illinois, Sue Rovens. I met her at an appearance I did here at a library, a local authors type appearance, and she was there. And she writes suspense. I don't know, kind of fringes on horror, but more suspenseful. She's really good. And then my granddaughter, Alex Crow, she wrote a story. It's like a 2-page story, but it was to her, I think she was like 8 at the time. And it's pretty gruesome. And I remember she brought it home because she was living with me at the time. And she said, Papa, I wrote this story for school. And I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. Let me see it. And I read it. And it's like, it's almost like a Hansel and Gretel type story about like this old woman that eats these kids and puts them in pies. And I'm like, what did the teacher say when you handed this in? And especially nowadays, where you go like this, like a gun, and they throw you in jail,
Yeah.
So
that's
so
funny.
I was like, what did the teacher say? And she's like, well, she didn't say much. I'm like, yeah, she was probably freaking out. So I'm like, well, you know what? I said, Alex, next time Papa does a short story book, I'll throw this in there. And so I did. And so I sent her a copy of it, but her mother, they live in North Carolina now. I sent her a copy of it. I said, you can just look at this, but don't look at the rest of it because it's too scary. Because she's only 11 now, but she's still a little young. But yeah, she's a published author at a very young age. So yeah, I thought it would be fun. I try to mix it up, like we said, there's no sense just redoing the same thing over and over again. So with each of these collections, I love to write short stories. So I think, some of my own creations and then throwing in some collaborative stuff is fun,
I love it. Well, I guess I can say, as they say, the acorn does not fall far from the tree.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I want to talk about your writing schedule. Do you only write when inspired, or do you actually have a set schedule? I'm going to write from 10 to 3 every day. Or do you just write down, say, okay, well, I have an idea. Let me write it down now. And I don't want to stop before I forget it.
I used to be more regimented. I used to need to write in like total silence. I wrote my first book in headphones, listening to like thunderstorms, because my late wife used to listen to the TV all the time and it was really loud. And so I couldn't concentrate. So I would put headphones on with some sort of noise so I wouldn't hear the TV. But then I read the book On Writing by Stephen King, which is fantastic. Any author should read it, no matter what genre you write. And he talked about that whole idea, and that he had experimented writing in like a common place of the house, which is what I do now. Most of my writing's done either in my living room or my dining room. And now it's just my wife and I at the house, so I don't have the grandchild and a lot more things going on. It's a little more chill. But different times of the day. I mean, I'm working at home now because of the COVID stuff. So I'm home all the time. So if I've got a break, lunch, or finish a little early one day because I get this idea I want to work on. So it's really sporadic. I usually don't write for more than a couple hours at a time, maybe 3 at the most. If I don't feel like I'm into it, I don't even bother, because I know anything I write, I'm not going to want. So it's got to be something I want to do, but I'm very blessed in that I always seem to be very, coming up with ideas. I can't even keep up with them. I have a file I keep on my computer with ideas so I don't forget some of them. But, I've got so many things going on that it's easy to, put stuff off. So I try to keep writing, especially lately through the pandemic. I've been writing a lot more, which is great. And I stopped watching professional sports for a variety of reasons. And that time has now been spent writing Creation of Chaos 3. So yeah, I try to, make good of the bad, but no special time of the day, no schedule really. I try to, if I know I'm going to have time, sit down and write. But if I'm not feeling it, it's not happening.
Definitely. Now, are you a plotter or a pantser? Meaning,
what?
do you a plot? It's called plotter. Which do you have an idea what you're going to write before you write, or are you a pantser? Do you write off the pants of your seat? Like, meaning you have no idea what you're going to write. You just take the pen and paper and whatever's done at the end. All right, here's my story. What are you more? Are you more in the middle?
Kind of a hybrid, I guess I would say. It depends. A short story is a lot different, as you know, Rich, because you're writing 20 pages or whatever it is, like a chapter in a novel. So you got to get to the point quickly, and that's one of the reasons I like them, is they're more exciting.
Yeah.
Novel has got to be paced properly, but anyway, I don't outline short stories. Usually I come up with an idea in my head, a very simple idea. Like, for example, I wrote a story called The Creep, that's going to be in Creation of Chaos 3. And I was dealing with I have a medical issue. I'm dealing with my foot from chemo. Amazingly, 19 years later, as a side effect of chemo, my bones in my foot are deteriorating. I have to wear a brace. And it started happening in my other foot. And I had these series of nightmares about it. And these nightmares was this old man was coming to me, and he was eating at my foot. It was like really weird. And I thought, well, I'm going to turn that into a story, So I get this idea of, okay, this old man comes to this person's bedside and eats them, why would they do that? So it's got to bat around. I refer to it as percolate in my head for a little while, sometimes a week or two, usually not much more. And then all of a sudden, it all falls into place. And then I pretty much know what I'm going to do. But there is still, in the Stephen King book On Writing, he talks about, characters, the best characters, tell you what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And that is the truth. I mean, when I read that, I'm like, that's kind of ridiculous, but he's right. I've had characters before that I thought in my novel that would be minor characters that became major characters because that's what they needed to be. And I didn't realize it at the time, and they just kind of told the story themselves. So a novel, though, has to be much, at least for me, much more planned out. I have like maybe a paragraph of an outline for each chapter, so at least I know what's happening as the chapters go, mostly for pacing, but also if I have to change something it's easier to go back and find it that way. There's probably much more modernized ways of doing it, but that's how I do it. And so, yeah, I think that's what works for me, but I don't do a lot of detailed outlining at all. For short stories, really nothing other than in my head.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I read on writing as well, and I was laughing at the same part. And when I was writing one of my stories, in the middle of writing it, I got so deep into it, I said, I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. And it didn't even occur to me. I'm the one creating the story. The characters took a life of their own, and they were like, what's he going to do next? And I got so deep, and that was probably one of my favorite stories in the book.
That's when you know it's on. Yeah,
exactly.
That's when it's on. They tell you what's going to happen. Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
You mentioned you have, 3 volumes of short stories, but you did write a novel, and I'm in the process of reading it right now. I love it. It's called The Many Lives of Enoch Strange. Where did you come up with the concept for that story?
The Dreadful Lives of Enoch Strange.
Yeah, that's what I meant. The Dreadful Lives. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Well, that one, when I was in Low 12, we had an album called This Side Toward Enemy, which was a story I wrote about a serial killer with 12 different serial killers inside of him. They weren't really personalities. They were more like demonic, like entities, but they each killed in different ways. And the Low 12 album goes through the story I wrote. Well, years later, when I started writing again, I thought about writing a novel. I really liked that idea, but there really wasn't enough, I thought, to carry a novel. So I came up with the origin of where those entities came from in the first part. And in the second part, in book 2, is where the story picks up with, in the modern age, with this guy with these 12 entities inside of him. And so the FBI is following him around the country, and they think it's a gang or a group because of all these different, murders that happen in different ways, and they write stuff on the walls. The problem is each personality writes it in a different handwriting, different style. So that's how the cops think it's a bunch of people. They don't realize it's just one person. So yeah, it came from the music world and then crossed over into my writing. So I seem to kind of teeter between the two. And when I merged them, like with the 666 Express idea, I think that's when I'm in my best, because I think those two things seem to, in my mind, make sense. The music and the writing all at once.
You mentioned earlier that you have to get the reader right from the very beginning. And I have to say, the minute that cat ran out and the nun was looking for the cat in the woods and she came upon that scene, I said, I cannot wait to finish this book. You had me from the very beginning. I didn't finish it yet. I'm in the middle of it, and I try and figure out where it's going to go. And that's what I love, because there's so many twists and turns. I'm not giving anything away by saying this, but I'm at the part where they have to collect the nuns for the abbot.
Boy.
I know.
Oh boy, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're in for it. You're in for it. But no, the Enoch Strange thing is kind of funny. Is that I was trying to think of a way to combine the backstory and the modern story, and I couldn't figure out a way to do it. And it was really bothering me, because I was getting to the part where, okay, I need to do this, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was at work, and I had this phone message in my mailbox, one of those while you were out, little phone message things. And it said to call Enoch Strange. And I'm like, is that like a person, or is that like a thing? Like, what is that? It sounds like somebody in Harry Potter, And I'm like, it's cool though, and they're like, no, that's like a person, So I'm like, okay. So I called this guy, and he was just like a normal dude, like, hey, what's up? I was just like expecting him to have this real crazy voice or something like that, But I'm like, that is such a cool name, So I created a character. It had nothing to do with the person with that name. But I created a character that is the linchpin between book 1 and book 2. It worked perfectly, so it just kind of fell into my lap.
Now, onto your podcast. We mentioned it several times, and I have to say, Murder, Metal, Mayhem. I think the title says it all.
Yeah. Well,
I
that's what
love
I
it.
wanted to come up with, a title that when you read it, there was no question what we were going to be doing. You see a lot of these podcasts named with these very elaborate, kind of clever, this or
Yeah.
that. Some of them are good. Some of them are like, what is that even about? I wanted to come up with something that was just very blunt. You're not listening to this podcast to hear about self-help or anything like that. You're
Definitely not.
listening to murder, metal, and mayhem, and that's exactly what we
I
deal
love
every
it.
week.
Yeah, well, you
So
break it
yeah,
down into three parts. The first part is about murder, serial killers. Second part
yeah,
was metal with Chris Kovacs gives his review. I love
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
then mayhem. From what I can tell, I listen to several of your
Crazy.
podcasts. They're just telling crazy stories about your friends and different things that have happened to you in your life. And it's a
Yes.
great breakdown.
Thanks.
And I know, like, just like with this podcast, sometimes they can go for 38 minutes. Other times they can go for 3 hours. I
Right.
just, whenever it ends, it ends. And that's what I love about
Right.
your podcast, because if it's
Yeah.
really interesting. I listened to the one recently on the Boston Strangler, which,
Oh, okay. That
yeah,
was a good one.
I have to say, what a disturbing story to say the least.
Yeah, that guy's messed up.
But there is, believe it or not, one funny event that happened involving a Texas lawmaker on April Fool's Day,
Yeah, wasn't
1971.
that awesome?
Tell me about that.
Yeah,
I,
some guy down in Texas, some legislator down there came up with with some sort of, like, was it a proclamation or whatever the hell
yeah,
it was, of the Boston Strangler. What was I'm trying to remember now. 'Cause you're doing,
population control, controlling
that's what it
population.
was. It was
Yeah,
like commending the Boston Strangler for population control, which of course is not very funny, but he was just trying to prove a point that these people weren't reading what they were signing.
yeah,
And as soon
exactly.
as they all signed it, he pointed it out and then rescinded it. So it didn't mean anything, but it was really funny.
Yeah,
I thought that
exactly.
was
You have to have
great.
a sense of humor. There's way
Yeah,
too.
it was like in the 60s too. So,
Yeah,
people a
exactly.
little more, lenient, I guess, back then.
I loved it. Now, when did your interest in serial killers begin?
My dad was a parole officer in New York State. So I grew up hearing about that kind of stuff at the dinner table, Son of Sam and all those different cases.
Yeah.
He worked at Bedford Hills, the women's prison there, but, had some pretty famous, the Gene Harris, the Scarsdale Diet, the one that killed the Scarsdale Diet doctor, Amy Fisher, a few notable prisoners there. But, he talked about that kind of stuff. And then my mom worked for a divorce attorney, and she worked for the attorney that represented Hella Crafts, who was the woman who was put through the wood chipper in Newtown, the wood chipper murders or murder. But my mother worked for that attorney that represented her in her divorce. And she said, if I don't show up for an appointment, he killed me. And of course he did. So, hearing that kind of stuff at the table, I guess, just sparked my interest in it. So
I
I
remember
just find it
very
fascinating.
Yeah, well, I remember very clearly. For me, 1977, I was 9 years old, and that's when we had the big blackout in New York City, and
Oh,
that's when the
yeah.
Son of Sam was.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember my mother, everybody stayed in the house because we didn't know where he was, what he was doing until later on, David Berkowitz. But yeah, I remember
Yeah.
even at a young age for myself, just my interest in that began probably around that age, around 9 years old. Because these stories, I mean, they're disturbing, but they're fascinating. And it's
Yeah.
every podcast I've listened to yours and even books I've read, it always begins with the parents being basically shitty parents and the way they treated their kids, like the Boston Strangler. They had to watch their
Yeah,
mother
this is
have the
awful.
fingers, and then they had to have sex with each other, which is, I mean, the stories you were getting into,
Yeah.
this really happened. And
I
it's,
know,
but
it's awful. But then some of them are totally normal, like BTK. I mean, his upbringing was completely normal. So not all of them are like that, but a lot of them are. That, especially a lot of them we've done. Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes. I mean, absolutely awful. Thrown out of the house at 8 years old, living on the streets, raped. I mean, just awful stuff. So I mean, these people, what do you expect them to come out? They're animals. So some of it's nature, some of it's nurture. But yeah, we talk about some pretty gruesome stuff. We just did this week episode 122, so we've been at it for about 2.5 years now. So it's a lot of fun. And every week, it's a tough pace to keep.
I can imagine. Well, another interesting episode that I listened to involved Paul Bateson. Tell me about him.
Yeah, the actor that played the radiologist on The Exorcist was a real life radiologist, but he also murdered somebody. Was a famous like a news magazine writer. I can't remember the guy's name now. But anyway, Paul Bateson was gay, and he met this guy at a bar and then went back to his place. And one thing led to another, and he kills him. And he got caught, but then they believe he was the person that may have done what they referred to as the bag murders in New York, where all these gay men were turning up missing, and then they were finding body parts in the Hudson River in these medical bags that came from the hospital where Bateson worked, and actually in the radiology department. So the likelihood that he actually did those was pretty high, but we don't know. Bateson is dead now, I believe, but yeah, crazy that the guy that was in The Exorcist was really a radiologist in real life. That's how Friedkin found him. Was he went to the hospital to watch that procedure done that they do to Reagan in the movie, and he was so impressed with the crew, the nurse, the radiologist, and the doctor, he hired all of them. So the people in that scene in the movie are real. They're actually, do this every day. So it was very realistic.
Very realistic. And what I think was funny is you mentioned it, and I was thinking the same thing. Back then, that was so controversial, that scene. It was so bloody.
It was.
Now we look at it, you mentioned Hatchet, which I loved, and you mentioned Saw, and all these other movies.
Come on now.
That was nothing, really. That was more like a rom-com scene.
I know. It does seem pretty tame when you watch Saw or something like that.
But I think that was funny, you talking about this too. The woman that passed out and then tried to sue the movie company.
Yeah, it was like the best thing that ever happened to him, because they get all the publicity of this woman that she fell down and got hurt, or I can't remember what she sued him.
She passed out because of the movie. It was funny because my 8th grade teacher, she said when she was a teenager, she worked at the drive-in passing out smelling salts when The Exorcist played. That was her job. I know.
That's hilarious.
I can't imagine that really happening now. To me, I grew up probably just like you did. My father used to wake my brothers and I up, hey, Phantasm's on. Hey, Evil Dead's on. So I saw all these movies. By the time I was 12 years old, I was so desensitized to anything.
Right.
Nothing really affected me. It's just like, all right, I know it's fiction. I'm not gonna become a serial killer. I think sometimes it's better if your parents are more open-minded and they let you experience it as a little kid. Because by the time you're 17, 18, it's old news, and you're not really gonna. If somebody's sheltered their whole life, when they get out, So I think sometimes there's like a good balance, but I'm glad my parents gave me the balance of introducing me to metal, introducing me to horror movies, instead of saying, oh, don't listen to this, the whole PMRC thing. I'm so glad that, don't listen to those lyrics, So yeah, exactly. So I think that it was good that, I saw The Exorcist. I mean, it came out in 73. I probably saw it maybe when I was around 8 or 9. I was a little bit older.
It freaked me out when I first saw it. Man, I was nuts,
Well, you mentioned one of your favorite writers is William Peter Blatty. I never read his books, but I know that because I love The Exorcist 3 like you, and Legion is his book. I have to read his books because you were saying it, which I thought was funny. So by the time The Exorcist scene was over, you were so drained.
I was exhausted. I had to go lay down, man. It was crazy. Yeah, just amazing writing. He's just so good at telling a story. The pacing was fantastic. Legion was amazing. I love both of those books. Those are the only 2 of his I've read. I've got a couple of his others, but I haven't read them. I just bought them to have them in case I wanted to read them. But I love The Exorcist and Legion, which is, like you said, Exorcist 3.
Yeah, well, and you said it correctly, too. It was similar to Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. It had nothing to do with Halloween.
Yeah,
they wanted to get the people who liked Halloween. If they took the words The Exorcist 3 off of there, I think it would have been much more popular, because it was a great movie. Exorcist 2 was a horrible movie, and that ruined it for part 3. But if you take.
Yeah, I read an interview with him where they flat out wouldn't do it unless it had the Exorcist name on it. They wanted that cachet of the Exorcist. So that's the way it works, money talks. But I wish they would have called it Legion and left it like that, because man, that was amazing. I loved how they brought back the actor that played
Jason Miller.
Yeah,
Yeah, Father
Jason
Karras.
Miller, fantastic. Love that they brought him back for that. It was so well done. It was just such a shame that it had that name, and like you said, after two, people kind of lost interest in it. It didn't get its fair shake.
You know what I didn't realize until years later? His son is Jason Patric, who played in the movie Rush. Jason Miller's son is
Really?
Jason Patric. He's an
Oh,
actor, which,
wow.
yeah.
Okay. I
But
didn't know that.
and also the one Max von Sydow, he was
Yeah.
younger than Jason Miller. They made him up to look like an old guy, and then in movies, recently, he looked like he did back in The Exorcist. I said, boy, this guy had never
It's funny
aged.
you say that, because he just passed not that long ago, right?
Yeah.
And I
very
think I
recently.
saw him like, man, the guy didn't even age. I didn't even realize that. That's funny.
Yeah, he was 35 years old when they filmed that movie.
That's
and they
hilarious.
said it was impossible for him to get any roles after that because they always thought he was an old guy. He goes, no, they made me up like that.
That's hilarious.
No, I love that. I'm just like you. That's probably one of my favorite all-time horror movies.
Oh, yeah.
It's not even a horror
Definitely.
movie. It's a psychological thriller. Like you said, it's more about Father Karras and what he's going through. And it's not really a horror movie. I love it. Because just like The Shining, the first half of The Shining is like the build-up.
Yeah.
And I've had so many people say, oh, my God, that movie is so boring. When's it going to get to the good part? I said, no, the good part is happening little by little. And the crazier
the deterioration. Yeah.
And I loved, speaking of Stephen King, I loved Dr. Sleep. The movie I didn't like too much.
Me too.
The book was excellent.
I have not read the book. I liked the movie, but I haven't read the book. So maybe if I did, I wouldn't. But I thought the movie was better than I thought it would be. I thought it was going to be garbage. And my wife and I were both pretty impressed with it. But to me, The Shining is his best book. I think. I really love it. I like other stuff too. I love Salem's Lot. I like a lot of the older ones. I love his short stories for the most part. Some of them not so much. But man, when you've written as much as him, not everything is going to appeal to everybody. You know what I mean?
What's impressive about me is we were talking about Stephen King earlier, and on writing, the first couple books he doesn't even remember writing because he was so drunk all the time.
I know,
which is
that
very
crazy?
impressive.
Yeah, right.
He said it wasn't until he went out to the garbage to put out a can of beer, and he said, "When did they dump this?" And he didn't realize he was drinking a case a night. But just the fact that he was writing great novels and he doesn't even remember writing them was impressive.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, I want to get back to Murder Metal Mayhem because you are a co-host. Let's talk about the other hosts.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Chris Shawback is who I started doing the show with. He's a friend of mine from the band world. He's just a local. Knew him, him and his family, and we got talking one day at a wedding. I was the officiant at this wedding, which is kind of funny. And Chris was attending the wedding, and we, were catching up, and we were talking about Joe Matheny, the cannibal that fed his victims to his customers at his roadside barbecue stand. And this guy sitting next to us got freaked out and got up and walked away. And we're like, that was kind of cool. And so he was turning me on to podcasts, and I listened to, I think it was last podcast on the left was what he was telling me about. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I really got into it. So then he sent me this one of these two guys talking about death metal. It was really bad. And I was like, this is ridiculous. We could do better than this. I mean, these guys had like sponsors, and I'm like, how is this even possible? So me and Chris started doing it. And then Chris Kovacs came on in the early days, like the third or fourth podcast. He was doing a vinyl segment because he was real into vinyl, and I wasn't really so much into it. So he was talking about like new stuff coming out on vinyl. And then it morphed into he would feature a band, and then, it's grown from there. So he's just as much a part of the show as the rest of us. And then Joey Cashman, he's been recently added to the show. He's a friend, a local guy here. He does a one-man band project called Goremonger. And Joey's a real fun guy and knows a lot about serial killers. And so he's been coming in. So it's been the four of us here for the last, since the pandemic started here in Illinois in March. Joey's been with us on the show. So it's all four of us. And CK, Chris Kovacs, he's in Danbury, Connecticut, and he does his remotely. We talk to him on Messenger, but then he records himself on his end, and then he Dropboxes the audio to me, and I put it in there in place of the Messenger, and then it sounds like he's right there in the room with us. Sounds really good.
No, it sounds great. And there was something, I was listening to one of your podcasts the other day, and I learned something because there's a mutual Connecticut band that we love, Fate's Warning. And Chris was mentioning that Jim Matheos, the guitar player, said that he wants his last release to be his last Fate's Warning album. So do you know anything about that?
I don't. Chris said he read that in an interview with Ray Alder, the singer, that it was the last Fate's Warning. I don't know. I emailed Jim. Jim and I keep in touch. I emailed him when the new album came out. Said, "Man, I love the new album. How about getting you on the podcast?" And I know Jim hates doing interviews, so I knew he would tell me no, but I felt obligated to at least ask him, hoping that maybe he would do it. And he's like, "No, I'm not doing any interviews for this album." So that makes me wonder if it is really the last one. Maybe he doesn't want to answer that question. I don't know. But all I know is kind of the same thing you heard, is maybe a rumor. But Chris said he thought he read it in a Ray Alder interview. So if Ray talked about it in an interview, maybe it is a known thing, but I haven't seen that anywhere else.
I know he has the Arch Matheos thing going too. So he's been doing a lot with
amazing.
John Arch. Yeah, I love that. So
yeah, Jim's got a bunch of stuff going on, but I don't know, with the pandemic, obviously musicians are kind of hurting right now. But when I last talked to him, he was doing well. He's living in New Hampshire. He's been married to the same woman for as long as I've known him. And he seems pretty content. So he's doing well.
Well, I listened to your interview with Andrew Hudson. Speaking of interviews, he's in the Australian thrash metal band Harlot. Great interview.
Love those guys.
Loved it. Yeah. So I went back and listened. That's why I love listening to shows like this, because that introduces me to things that I would never even have heard of.
Right.
Now, who are some of the other artists that you've interviewed? Because I heard recently, or maybe it was a couple months ago, that you mentioned King Diamond in the past as a hopeful guest. Did you ever get him?
I interviewed King Diamond when I was doing heavycore. I used to interview a lot of bands back then, like going to shows and interviewing them at the show. But since I've been doing Murder Metal Mayhem, I mean, we've done, some local bands we've had come in and play actually in the studio. We've had them on the show. Did one with Lee from Monstrosity. Did the interview with Harlot, like you heard. In Malice's Wake, we did one with them. Did Joey Vera from Fate's Warning and Armored Saint. Did Dr. Heathen Scum from the Mentors.
Wait, let's stop right there. Stop right there.
I did a whole Mentors episode. There's an entire Murder Metal Mayhem is all Mentors. You got to hear it because that interview's on there.
I have to listen to that one. I don't know how I missed that. I think the Mentors are hilarious, and
me too.
I mean, the singing is horrible, but the music is actually really good, and the lyrics are hilarious. There was one time, I'm sure you remember the Brick and Wood in New Haven.
Oh yeah.
Years ago, I went to go see the Mentors, and I'm waiting, and the owner of the bar said, "Yeah, they said they're drunk somewhere, and they don't know how to get over here." A couple of them passed out. They never even made it to the show.
That's hilarious. Jim Matheos is the one that first told me about them, because they were on Metal Blade, and he was out there. I think they were doing Awaken the Guardian. And he called me up. He's like, "Man, we're over here at the studio, and Bill Matoyer's playing us this shit." And he was like, it's just hilarious. It's like songs about all this crazy stuff. And then I was at the record store, and I saw it. And me and my buddy bought it, that you axed for it. And then I was hooked. I was like, this is amazing. But yeah, Dr. Heathen Scum was pretty funny. We interviewed him.
Then El Duce got hit by a train. I guess there were stories about him being murdered, but I think he was just so drunk he stumbled onto the train tracks. That's what I think.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories that some people say he killed Kurt Cobain, and then that was like payback. And I don't know how much of it's true. It's funny stories, but yeah, he got hit by a train walking home from a bar.
I saw that interview, and he was saying that Courtney Love paid him to kill Kurt Cobain. I heard that.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? It's a crazy world out there. So maybe it's true, but I think he just likes to tell stories.
It's possible.
Now, getting back to you, though, what is the 666 Club, and what do you receive as a member?
The 666 Club is a thing that we do with Murder Metal Mayhem. It's our Patreon page where people that listen to the show can join. It's just $3 a month. And what they get is the podcast a day early. They get the notes that we use for the podcast. They get discounts on merchandise. They get bonus content, like we did a Dahmer episode and a Ramirez episode that are only for our Patreon supporters. So stuff like that. When I do the karaoke songs, usually a week ahead, I send them to them so they get them early. So they get stuff early, kind of a VIP experience, but it's just $3 a month. Patreon.com/Murder Metal Mayhem. And that's it. And it helps us pay the bills and, buy equipment when stuff breaks. I mean, and as you know, it's not free doing this stuff. There are some expenses, and so it helps, offset that a little bit.
That's a great idea, because I love the fact that you're giving fans something special, and it only costs $3. I mean, it costs more for a coffee.
It's nothing. Yeah. Tried to keep it low for that reason,
Oh, I love that. What is the Voice of Dread podcast?
The Voice of Dread podcast is a new podcast that I'm doing starting in January. It's going to be a bi-weekly podcast, and I'm going to have different people on. I definitely want to have you on, authors, filmmakers, some makeup artists. We work with a guy, spellboundeffectsandart.com, that does like horror movie props and stuff like that. And check this out. He made this for me.
I love that.
My name carved into a forearm. This thing is like very real.
Yes.
And we've got a Murder Metal Mayhem one too. Yep. And he makes these things. And so I'll have him on, I'm sure. And artists, different people that I've associated with in Murder Metal Mayhem. But it's also going to talk about my writing. So it's more of a horror, my writing conglomeration, a bi-weekly. And it's on the Horns High Podcast Network that I started. So Murder Metal Mayhem and Voice of Dread are both on the same network. And we're looking at other podcasts maybe to add them to our roster. But right now it's those two, and that one starts first week of January. But people could go to voiceofdread.com. I've got a trailer on there. It's like 6 minutes long. Give you a little glimpse of what I'm going to be doing on there.
Pete, it was great having you on the show. I love talking to you. I love catching up. I mean, there's so many great things that you're doing out there. And
thank you.
You're just kicking ass, Horns High.
Horns High, brother.
So before we go, though, what's next? You mentioned a little bit about Voice of Dread. You mentioned Creation of Chaos Volume 3. So what's next, and where can people find you?
What's next? After Creation of Chaos 3 is done, my next thing is to jump back into a project I started and then had to get away from it for a bit. In Creation of Chaos 2, there's a short story, and it's on Wattpad as well, called Deeper Than Dead. I really like that idea, and I'm actually doing a 10-part series with an artist, Brian Usual. Brian has done a couple of my book covers. Brian's amazing. Brian is going to do an art piece for each of the 10 parts. So it's almost set up kind of like a Netflix series, but the story starts with Deeper Than Dead, and then it goes through the 10 parts. Each will be named something different. So it's like a series, and it'll have a full color art piece for each of the 10 sections. But the entire project is called Deeper Than Dead. Deeperthandead.com. I think it points to my Facebook page for it, and that'll be priority one, because I'm about I think I'm on part 4 right now, so I really need to get this done so I can concentrate on that, because Brian and I want to finish that up, and that'll be next. And that'll be like an illustrated novel. I don't really want to call it a graphic novel, because that's more like, to me, like a comic book. Nothing against it, but that's just not what I do. But this is going to be a novel, or a 10-part, book, with an illustration for each part. And then we're going to do a full-size poster with all the illustrations, and they're all going to tie in together. It's going to be really cool. Brian and I are doing that. But People can go to PeteAltieri.com. That's my Facebook page. Stay in touch with me there for the writing. Murder Metal Mayhem is on, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. MurderMetalMayhem.com will get you to our website with all the podcasts on there. You can also listen to it on, any podcast platform, Apple Music, iTunes, whatever you want to listen to it on, is pretty much everywhere. And Voice of Dread will be the same once it's ready. But like I said, that's January. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of how people can get a hold of me. But I do appreciate it very much, Rich. It was really good to talk to you. And I've known you for a really long time. And I always like to see friends of mine do well and succeed. And you look very happy. And I'm glad that you got married and that, you're doing well. And that's just awesome.
Yeah, well, same for you. And as Pete, you've said, I've known you for years, and I've followed you throughout the years. So everything you've done, I've been impressed with all the bands you've been in. Definitely buy everything from Low 12. Listen to all his podcasts and buy all his books. You will not be disappointed. Everybody from the Claus Corner, do that. You'll be very, very happy. It makes a great Christmas gift. Christmas is coming up.
Awesome.
And Pete, I will definitely be talking to you soon. I'd be proud to be on your podcast. I'd love to be on that.
Definitely. I'll be in touch because I'm starting to line up the guests now. So I'll let you know.
Okay. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Claus Corner. I would like to thank my guest, professional musician, songwriter, lyricist, music producer, author, and podcaster, Pete Altieri. I would also like to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in. Enjoy your day, everyone.